We live in a northern climate, okay, in Toronto, and this climate is not Paris, it is not Amsterdam.
Whenever urbanists point to Dutch cycling infrastructure as a model to follow, skeptics respond with a list of why Dutch cities are just too different to be relevant elsewhere, especially the US and Canada. This is all great if you live in a flat, tiny, crowded country with no real winter. Do they have a point?
The first common argument is density. The Netherlands is a densely populated country where things are close together and easy to bike to. Cycling just isn't practical in spread out continent-sized countries like Canada, the US, and Australia. At least, so the argument goes. But we're not interested in the density of the country so much as the density of the cities, where most people live and travel around. Dutch cities are denser than their North American counterparts, but the differences aren't as big as you think. And there are lots of places in Canada and the US that reach Dutch density.
To compare densities, let's look at how many people fit into a circle with a radius of 5 kilometers. Overlaid onto The Hague or Amsterdam, the circle covers about 550,000 people. In North America, you can get similar or higher densities in central areas of Vancouver, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Toronto, Philadelphia, Montreal, Boston, and of course, New York. But Amsterdam shouldn't really be our benchmark, because there are lower density Dutch cities that are usually considered better for cycling, like Utrecht, where about 350,000 people fit into the same circle. You can find similar densities in Washington, D.C., central Baltimore, Newark, and even many suburbs of Toronto or Los Angeles. And then there are also lower density Dutch cities, like Groningen and Nijmegen, where 200,000 people fit into this circle, corresponding to densities found in central Atlanta, St. Louis, Edmonton, Ottawa, Sacramento, San Antonio, and Minneapolis.
To be clear, you can't do this everywhere. There are lots of suburbs, for example, outside the core in Atlanta or Minneapolis, where the density is distinctly lower than anything that would be considered urban in the Netherlands. There are even some city centers, like Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Fort Worth, Texas, that don't come close to Dutch densities either. We don't actually think cycling is doomed at lower densities, but setting that aside for this video, North America has plenty of places that easily reach Dutch densities, including the older neighborhoods of most cities, and even many suburbs, especially in California, the northeastern US, and Canada. The striking thing isn't that Dutch cities are unrecognizably high density, it's that they have a density floor that they don't really fall under. Even on the edge, Dutch cities are almost always at least moderately dense. The other striking thing is, of course, that Dutch cities are very close together from a North American perspective, especially in the Randstad region in the west. This doesn't matter much for urban cycling, but it probably makes rural cycling more practical from one town to another. North America has places that are rural or remote in a way that doesn't really exist in the Netherlands.
The Netherlands is an old country built before the car, which makes it particularly suited for walking, cycling, and transit, according to critics. This feels intuitive from a North American perspective, where the best places for cycling or transit are almost always older neighborhoods built before cars were common. And it also fits into our perceptions of Europe as a series of medieval town centers, instead of a modern continent. But the Dutch had post-war growth. Not as much as the US or Canada, but the Dutch population has grown by 75% since 1950. And Dutch post-war developments are, believe it or not, more bike-friendly than the historic centers. There's no law of the universe that newer areas built to consider cars will also exclude other modes.
It's true that, after the invention of the car, North America was physically capable of building low-density sprawl in a way that the Netherlands just wasn't, with their limited land. But tens of millions of people live in denser neighborhoods built before World War II. Can they have a high-quality protected bike network? Also, the idea that we have plenty of land to sprawl doesn't apply everywhere. Calgary and Houston can expand in all directions, but Vancouver, San Francisco, and Los Angeles are seriously limited by the ocean and mountains. Even Toronto and Chicago have major land limitations from being directly on the Great Lakes. As a result, these metro areas are all denser than average in North America. Toronto, LA, and Vancouver are consistently at least as dense as a smaller Dutch city, even in most of their suburbs. And they'd be even denser if not for all their laws limiting density. Can these places have bike infrastructure?
The Netherlands has a mild climate that doesn't get that hot in the summer, or too cold and snowy in the winter. And that makes cycling year-round practical in a way that it just isn't elsewhere, according to critics. But many places in North America have similar climates, like Vancouver, and many more actually have better weather, like San Francisco or Los Angeles. It's true that we also have places with more extreme weather, but the way people single out weather as uniquely a problem for cycling really shows how much of a novelty bikes are for people. New York and Philadelphia both get hotter than Amsterdam in the summer. How could anyone bike in that heat? Well, those are both walkable cities where people walk places in the summer. If it's a heat wave, you might have to adapt, not staying out as long, avoiding midday, maybe taking transit instead. But people don't just stop walking places in the summer, let alone year-round. We know there are even hotter cities out there like Phoenix, but frankly, we live in Canada, and we've never even been to a place that hot in the summer, so we have no real experience to talk about places like that.
111 degrees? Phoenix can't really be that hot, can it?
We do have plenty of experience with the other extreme, though. Montreal is tied with Minneapolis for the harshest winters of any large metropolitan area on the continent, making Toronto feel mild and New York feel tropical. How do you bike in the cold? Well, you bundle up and wear winter clothing, just like with walking, except on a bike you're probably more concerned with your hands and face than your core. Anyone in a winter climate knows how to dress to walk, skate, ski, or snowshoe in the winter, but for some reason the thought of biking in the cold breaks people's minds. As for snow and ice, you can get studded tires for your bike, just like you have winter tires to drive or winter boots to walk. But really it's up to your city to plow and maintain the bike lanes like they do the roads and sidewalks. Most cities just don't do this, which helps explain why so many people have never thought of biking in the winter. Montreal has been getting better at bike lane snow removal recently, but quality differences between different bike routes are only amplified in the winter. The wide express bike corridors built with snow clearing in mind are a joy. The older two-way bike lanes are functional, but narrowed by leftover snow. Painted bike lanes often disappear, and routes where you have to share the road with cars become even more treacherous in winter. People use winter as an argument against bike infrastructure, but when you actually try biking in the winter, you want as much high-quality protected infrastructure as you can possibly get. Winter is the time of year when you want the most separation from car traffic. Ultimately, we think of cycling as a faster version of walking, and if walkable cities can exist in different climates, so can bike-friendly cities.
The Netherlands is flat, and that's another reason people commonly cite for why the country is uniquely suitable for cycling. There is some truth here. The country is very flat in a way that felt kind of surreal. What this misses, though, is that bikes have technology to handle hills. Gears work pretty well, and e-bikes are even better. There probably is a limit to how many hills a regular person wants to handle, but let's face it, most North American cities just aren't that mountainous. Our city is built around a hill, but unless you live at one of the peaks, most of your cycling will probably be relatively flat, and the hills you do encounter here and there probably won't be a deal breaker. Just like with winter, hills are much more stressful when you're sharing the lane with cars going fast. When you have space to go at your own pace, elevation isn't as stressful. This bike lane covering a hill is the third busiest bike route in Montreal, counting over 1 million riders last year. This bridge going to the suburbs is a big climb, but it saw more than 500,000 cyclists last year. This bike lane on a hill saw almost 300,000 riders last year, despite being new and not even fully connected to the other bike route at the top yet.
Even cities built near large mountain ranges in Western North America, like LA, Salt Lake City, and Denver, are mainly built on relatively flat plains or valleys at the base of the mountains, with at most some lower density residential areas on the actual mountains. A handful of cities are legitimately very hilly, like San Francisco, and this argument deserves at least some consideration there. But when we actually visited the Bay Area, we were pleasantly surprised at how useful cycling was. We didn't bike up the Twin Peaks or into the Berkeley Hills or anything, but lots of neighborhoods were flat or only moderately inclined, and the bigger hills we did encounter were less of a problem when we had our own lane. Being realistic, San Francisco is hilly enough to be a barrier to some people cycling, but even in one of the hilliest major cities on the continent, we never got the sense that bikes can just be written off. San Francisco has some of the highest rates of bike commuting in the US, which we'll cover in a future video.
The way we see it, the real difference between North America and the Netherlands isn't density, weather, or terrain as such. It's more abstract. It's consistency versus variation. The Netherlands is a small country with similar weather, terrain, and density that is consistently pretty conducive to cycling. In North America, we have lots of urban areas, and even many suburbs and small towns, where the distances are perfect for bikes. But at the same time, we also have a lot of lower density suburban and exurban sprawl, where the distances, road network, and extreme car-centric design make it hard for cycling to be competitive or even practical. Our cities are generally pretty flat, but many do have some neighborhoods in the hills where cycling is less of an obvious choice. We also have more extreme and varied weather across our countries, which doesn't make cycling impossible any more than it makes walking impossible. But it does add a bit more friction to the process, as cities have to learn to plow and maintain bike lanes like they do for roads and sidewalks.
The basic challenge is that while bikes are practical in lots of places in the US and Canada, they're not as consistently practical everywhere, even within a city. That makes it harder to build a national or even citywide culture and politics around supporting and encouraging cycling. It might not matter how much density and bike-friendly distances you have in your pre-war central city, if suburban voters veto bike infrastructure for being not in their interests, rightly or wrongly, or store owners oppose bike lanes because they drive in from far away and assume that their customers do too. Your city might be mostly flat, but people in wealthier, hillier areas often have disproportionate political influence. It's not just politics, it's also culture and what people are used to. Your small town might be compact and bikeable, but if it's surrounded by rural areas where distances don't work so well for bikes, lots of people who move to your town won't bring a bike with them or any expectations or experience with cycling for transportation.
Sometimes Dutch people tell us that they don't have a cycling culture, but that feels kind of like fish who don't realize they're swimming in water. Sure, most Dutch people don't follow the Tour de France, or spend their time reading resources for bike mechanics, but that's not the kind of bike culture that we're talking about. It's about cycling being considered a normal way to get around, not something quirky that you have to justify or explain. It's about almost everyone owning a bike. It's about places knowing that they have to provide good bike parking to appeal to customers. It's about drivers also being cyclists themselves. It's about transportation professionals having experience with bike infrastructure, and politicians being willing to prioritize it. None of this sprung out of thin air in the Netherlands either. They had their own fights, but we'd argue that it's easier to develop this kind of national bike culture when cycling is practical in 90% of your country than when it's practical in, let's say, 40 or 50%.
We're not quite sure if we're more optimistic or pessimistic since coming back from the Netherlands. On one hand, the problem facing bike infrastructure in much of North America is not the fundamentals: density, hills, weather, or anything else. Cycling is practical. Bike infrastructure can be relevant. On the other hand, this leaves culture, politics, and the momentum of car-centric design as the obstacles, and those are big. Ultimately, change is happening, but it's happening unevenly. Toronto thoroughly rejected 2 anti-bike candidates for mayor recently.
Right now, these are live images from Chopper 24 of Olivia Chow about to take off on her flower-adorned bike. There she goes.
But Ottawa, with its more suburban city borders, picked a mayor who would bravely stand up to the war on cars.
My transportation strategy doesn't declare war on cars.
There is a real dilemma when it comes to using the Netherlands to argue for bike infrastructure in other places, though. On one hand, it really is the most exciting and compelling example to use. People often have no idea what a bike-friendly city even looks like, thinking it means cars are banned and that tradespeople, ambulances, and deliveries don't exist or something.
They want you to walk or ride a bike no matter where you live, no matter where you're going, no matter what month of the year.
Being able to point to this one country where bikes are everywhere, that is still in fact a functioning society, is really powerful. On the other hand, if cycling advocates focus too much on the Netherlands, if it's always the example that gets brought up, regular people and cycling critics will understandably get a little suspicious and assume that cycling is just a quirk of one unique country. People arguing for bike infrastructure need to be able to talk about other places: London, New York, Vancouver, Bogota, Tokyo, and so on. That's what we're trying to do with Montreal on this channel. It might not be as consistent or refined as Dutch cities, but it's a clear cycling success story in North America that tends to feel more familiar and relevant to people, especially because it has hills and harsh winters. People can't use those arguments to dismiss it.
We also need to be careful to not obsess over copying every single aspect of Dutch cycling culture, because that can give the impression that cycling is just a quirk of the Netherlands. Differences in culture, weather, density, or terrain might not make cycling impossible elsewhere, but they can influence how we do it. We've seen some people scoff at the idea of bike commuters showering at work because cycling is supposed to be casual, not athletic. But if you live in a place that's hillier or warmer, or you're covering longer distances than in the Netherlands, sweat is real. Dutch-style upright bikes are pretty cool. We love the built-in double locks, but the weight and riding position aren't as appealing for people covering hills or longer distances. The Dutch are also famous for never wearing helmets for normal city riding, citing their modest speeds, and that's fine. But people in cities with hills or more than one snowfall per year might reasonably choose to wear a helmet more often. Another difference is that the new wave of micromobility like e-scooters and one-wheels seem to be much more common in North America. Maybe part of arguing for building bike infrastructure here is designing and presenting bike lanes as micromobility lanes.
When people dismiss Dutch cycling successes as not relevant for them, we're not Amsterdam. Sometimes they really do live in an exceptionally sprawling, remote, or hilly area where bikes aren't practical. But much of the time they live in a regular place where bikes can easily work, and they're just reflexively reacting to something they've never tried or really even considered. Often they're judging how unappealing the cycling experience currently is, without really processing that Dutch-style infrastructure would make cycling more practical and pleasant. Things like hills or winter weather can be challenges, but they're much easier to tackle with protected bike infrastructure. Ultimately, the solution is to keep learning from world-class cycling countries, while also being able to talk about more local cycling success stories that feel more familiar and relevant to people. We also need to stress that bikes are not exotic machines that are only practical in unique circumstances. Cycling is a faster version of walking, and it should be relevant in most of the same contexts. More contexts, arguably, because it's easier for a distance to be bikeable than walkable. In Canada and the US, 5 times more people walk to work than bike to work. What explains that? Is it distance, weather, or hills? No. It's the fact that most roads have sidewalks for walking, but not protected bike lanes or pathways for cycling. Thanks for watching through to the end of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and a special thanks to our supporters on Patreon who made this video possible.